HMT Rona was a British India steam navigation company passenger and cargo liner that was built on Tyneside in 1926 as SS Rona and requisitioned as a troop ship in 1940. Rona was sunk in the Mediterranean in November 1943 by a Henschel H's 293 guided glide bomb launched by a Luftwaffe aircraft. More than 1,100 people were killed, most of whom were U.S. troops. Building. In 1925, British India Line ordered 2 new ships for its Madras, Nagapattinam, Singapore service. They were sister ships but were built by different shipyards and had different engines. Hawthorne Leslie and Company built Rona at its shipyard at Hebburn on Tyneside. Barclay, Curle and Company built Rajula in Glasgow on Clydeside. Both ships were launched and completed in 1926. Rona was launched on 24 August 1926 and completed on 5 November. She was named after a village in Sonipat, Punjab, India. She had 15 corrugated furnaces that heated 5 single-ended boilers with a combined heating surface of 14,080 square feet. These fed steam at 215 lbf, in 2-2 4-cylinder quadruple expansion steam engines, developing a total of 984 nhp. Each engine drove one of the ship's twin screws, giving Rona 984 nhp or 5,000 ihp. She achieved 14.3 knots on her sea trials and had a cruising speed of 12.5 knots. By 1934, Rona carried wireless direction-finding equipment. Civilian service. Instead of taking up her Madras, Nagapattinam, Singapore route immediately, Rona spent her first 6 months of service taking military reinforcements to Shanghai. As a result, she did not start her intended service until June 1927. Cyclone in Madras on 31 October 1927. Rona was moored to a buoy in Madras harbour in India when a weather signal and falling air pressure warned of the approach of a tropical cyclone. Her master, E.G. Carey, had her starboard anchor laid out with 90 fathoms of cable, and got the engineers to raise steam so that her main engines could be started if needed. By 0700 hours on 1 November a heavy swell was running within the harbour, at times lifting the 4-ton mooring buoy completely out of the water. By 1100 hours there was also heavy rain and Rona's bridge ordered the engines to stand by. 10 minutes later the anchor cable parted, shaking the ship. She was now dragging her port anchor, which Captain Carey therefore decided to have hauled in. Weighing anchor would take about 20 minutes, so in the meantime Carey had Rona got underway to avoid being run onto the harbour breakwater. Other ships were moored in the harbour, and Carey's helmsman had to steer through a narrow space between 2 of them in a very heavy sea. Eventually Rona was able to make for the harbour mouth and put to sea and head 20 miles south to where the storm was less severe. Next day the cyclone had passed and Rona returned to port. Deck passengers were new. Rona was certified to carry 5,064 deck passengers. In 1931 new regulations called the Similar Rules reduced this to 3,851, but this was still more than any other UK-registered ship. War service. When the UK entered the Second World War in September 1939, Rona was in the Indian Ocean. Apart from a voyage from Karachi to Suez with convoy K4, Rona operated unescorted between Rangoon and Madras until late November. On 10 December she left Bombay for the Mediterranean, passing through the Suez Canal on 21 December and reaching Marseille on 26 December. From 3 January 1941 until 10 March she operated unescorted between Marseille and Port of Haifa in Mandatory Palestine, at first in convoys but after 29 January independently. On 15 March 1940 Rona returned through the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean, where she operated unescorted between Bombay, Rangoon and Colombo until June. In May she was requisitioned as a troop ship, and on 6 June she left Bombay for Durban. She then ran between Durban, Mombasa and Dar es Salaam until 28 July, when she left Mombasa for Bombay. Rona took troops from Bombay to Suez in August 1940 in convoy BN3 and from Bombay to Port Sudan in September-October 1940 in convoy BN6. She made further trips from Bombay to Suez in November 1940 in convoy BN8A, from Colombo to Suez in February 1941 in convoy US-81, and from Bombay to Singapore in March 1941 in convoy BM4. The day after the Iraqi coup d'etat in April 1941, Rona was ordered to Karachi, whence she took some of the first elements of Iraq force to Basra in convoy BP2. During the Anglo-Iraqi War in May, the ship made a second trip from Karachi to Basra in convoy BP5. After the Allied victory in Iraq at the end of May, she spent the rest of the year running between Basra and Bombay, each time going to Basra in a BP series convoys and returning independently. On 8 December 1941, Japan invaded Malaya. A month later, Rona left Bombay for Singapore in convoy BM10, arriving on 25 January 1942. She left on 28 January in convoy NB1, a fortnight before Singapore was surrendered to Japan. From March 1942, Rona spent a year crisscrossing the Indian Ocean between Bombay, Karachi, Colombo, Basra, Aden, Suez, Khorramshahr, Bandar Abbas, Bahrain and Abadan, sometimes in convoys but much of the time unescorted. In March 1943 she sailed from Bombay in convoy Bar 40 to Aden and then independently to Suez, where she passed through the canal on 6 to 7 April. For the remainder of her career, Rona supported the North African Campaign, the Allied invasion of Sicily and the Allied invasion of Italy. Until the beginning of July she ran independently between Alexandria, Tripoli and Sfax. From then on she sailed mostly in convoys, working between Alexandria, Malta, Tripoli, Augusta, Port Said, Bizerta and Turin. Loss. At 1,230 hours on 25 November 1943, Rona and 4 other troop ships left Oran in French Algeria. At sea 3 hours later they joined convoy which was passing on its way from Britain to Alexandria. About 1,630 hours the next day off Bougie, the convoy was attacked by about 30 Luftwaffe Heinkel 177 bombers escorted by Junkers Ju-88 aircraft, followed by between 6 and 9 torpedo bombers. At the time the convoy had a limited air escort of 4 land-based Free French Air Force Spitfires. Later in the course of the attack they were relieved by RAF Spitfires. The He-177s carried Henschel H's 293 radio-guided glide bombs, an estimated 60 of which they launched at the convoy. The convoy's combined anti-aircraft fire seems to have impeded most of the attackers' attempts to guide their glide bombs onto their targets. Rona's SDEM's gunners contributed with her machine guns, a Lycon autocannons and about 20 rounds from her 12-pounder gun. The convoy shot down at least 2 aircraft and damaged several others. Rona was the only casualty. About 1715 or 1,725 hours, a He-177 piloted by Hans Dr. Mann released a glide bomb that hit Rona on her port side, at the after end of her engine room and No. 6 troop deck. Men poured on deck, many of them badly wounded. The impact was about 15 feet above the waterline, but it flooded the engine room, knocked out all electrical equipment including her pumps, and set the ship ablaze. The impact demolished the No. 4 bulkhead. It also destroyed 6 of her 22 lifeboats and forced out the plates of her hull so that none of her surviving port boats could be lowered past them. Troops cut the falls of some of the boats, causing them to fall in the sea and be swamped. Only 8 boats were launched. They became overloaded with troops and most became waterlogged or capsized. The number 1 deck Serang, Bao and Mitha, acted professionally to help the chief officer to launch the boats. Other members of the Lascar crew, however, launched the 2 aft lifeboats and abandoned ship without remaining to help to launch the other boats. However, with number 4 holder fire and all communications severed, the crewmen aft had lost contact with the bridge and had no way to reach the boat deck to help with the other boats. They disobeyed orders, but were acting on their own. As Rona listed 12 degrees to starboard, her crew launched most of her 101 life rafts. By 1,750 hours only a few rafts remained, so they took the hatchboards from number 3 hold and threw them overboard too. By now number 4 hold, just aft of the engine room, was on fire. The York-class minesweeper US Pioneer and cargo ship Clan Campbell fell behind the convoy to rescue survivors. Protected by the Hunt-class destroyer HMS Atherstone, which made a smoke screen and gave anti-aircraft cover, Clan Campbell had a high freeboard, so she lowered a cargo net for survivors to use as a scramble net. However, the climb was about 30 feet from the sea to the deck, which was very difficult for many of the exhausted survivors. The wind was only force 4, but there was a 15 to 20 foot swell that prevented the rescue ships from launching their own boats. The master, Captain T.J. Murphy, was among the last personnel left aboard, along with his chief, second and third officers, senior medical officer and 4 U.S. soldiers. This group remained on the foredeck for about half an hour after all the other surviving soldiers and crew had abandoned ship. About 90 minutes after the missile hit the ship, there was a rending noise, probably from the collapse of a bulkhead aft. Clouds of smoke came from number 3 hold and the ship settled by the stern. The group threw the last 4 rafts overboard and abandoned ship. After night fell, Atherstone switched from anti-aircraft cover to rescuing survivors, and the tug Mindful arrived from Boogie and joined the operation. The rescue continued until 0215 hours on the 27th of November. 819 survivors were taken to Philippeville, 602 on Pioneer, about 110 on Clan Campbell and about 70 on Atherstone. 1,138 men were killed, including 1,015 U.S. personnel. The attack is the largest loss of U.S. troops at sea due to enemy action in a single incident. A further 35 U.S. troops of the 2,000 originally embarked later died of wounds, as well as the troops. 5 of Rona's officers and 117 of her 195 crew were killed, along with one of her 12 DEMS gunners and 1 hospital orderly. US Pioneer rescued 606 survivors. Details of the loss were revealed slowly over time. By February 1944, the U.S. government had acknowledged that more than 1,000 soldiers had been lost in the sinking of an unnamed troop ship in European waters, but it hinted that a submarine was responsible. By June 1945, the U.S. government had released accurate casualty figures. The ship had been identified as Rona, and the cause of the sinking had been identified as German bombers, but did not mention the fact that a guided bomb was used. In 1948, a history of British India Line in the Second World War was published, stating, the missile was one of the new glider bombs guided by wireless. The U.S. government released the full story only in 1967 after the passing of the Freedom of Information Act. Monuments. Her Lascar seamen are commemorated in the Commonwealth War Graves Commission monuments at Chittagong and Mumbai. A monument to the U.S. troops who were killed was unveiled at Fort Mitchell National Cemetery in Seal, Alabama in 1996. In 1962, the traffic median of the Esplanade in Bronx, New York, at the corner of Astor Avenue, was named in memory of Private Sidney Weissman, a local resident killed in the sinking of the Rona. Controversy. In 1998, Dr. James G. Bennett, who lost a brother in the sinking, published a book, The Rona Disaster, through the self-publishing service Ex Libris. In it he alleges that the heavy loss of life was due to the incompetence and cowardice of the Rona's Lascar crew and faulty safety procedures and equipment aboard. In 2002, the History Channel released an episode of its History Undercover series, The Rona Disaster, World War II's Secret Tragedy, that was based on Bennett's book and repeated his allegations. Wartime reports by the lieutenant colonel in command of the U.S. troops aboard, and by Rona's second officer, and other survivors, contradict many aspects of Bennett's allegations.